So while academics and social development are reasons to redshirt, there are increasing priorities for athletics. Let's say hello to Steve Balance. He's a baseball coach, works in the state of Maryland. He believes that redshirting 8th graders increases the chance to achieve a Division I athletic scholarship. Joyce Bassett is executive news editor of the Times-Union in Albany, New York, and she advises parents to redshirt their kids by delaying kindergarten. Mark Robinson played basketball under Coach Bob Knight at Indiana University. He earned his Ph.D. while playing professionally in the UK, and he warns about the possible adverse effects of redshirting youngsters. And Chris Stankovich is a sports psychologist who says parents should not have sports in mind as a primary reason to redshirt their kids. So I welcome you all. It's good to have you here. Steve, why do you believe redshirting could make sense?
A lot of times because of the maturity and the academic reasons behind it with the athletics. We're finding a lot of people that we deal with, particularly in some of the 8th grade, are just not ready for high school. We make sure it's a factor, though, with academics, social, and the athletic part of it, in this case baseball. But it makes sense from maturity, confidence level, and those are a lot of factors based on the people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
How many of them are in public school?
Very few. A lot of them are more in the private school field, looking to continue into private school. So I would say the percentage is probably more 90% private versus 10% public.
Is it because public schools just make it more difficult to do this when you're that far along?
Unfortunately, I think some of it is, a little bit of the parents' mindset and just the striving for getting a scholarship, in some cases at all costs. And some of those factors play in when they go to private school at an earlier age and everything gets advanced. That's just what we see as a regular basis. Some might even use the word epidemic.
Yeah. Mark, what do you make of this increasing trend?
I think when you look at the fundamental development of kids in a sport, I think if you have a kid that's not as big or not as fast as the parent would like them to be, I think they need to work on the fundamentals. I think you see a lot of instances where teams that are bigger, that are stronger, that are all the same age go against teams that aren't as big, that aren't as talented athletically, but because they have the fundamental development skills, particularly in basketball, they're able to compete. But I hear a lot of conversation in the piece about what's the worst thing that can happen, where there are a lot of personal development issues that go into the development side of an athlete who's held back a year. Now, is it against the law? No, it's not against the law. But I think that we're not looking at some of the fundamental problems that come from a social standpoint. It all seems to be athletic. It doesn't seem to be anything concerned with the social aspect of that developmental process.
Joyce, what do you make of that?
Well, I went through this as a parent, and my son, he had a late birthday, late August birthday, and we thought about it a little bit and we didn't do it, and now he's in college. He's a 19-year-old playing against 25 and 24-year-olds, and we look back and think, hey, maybe we should have done that.
Do you believe, though, there were other developmental issues on the table that you recognized at the time in not doing it?
I think at that point it was a consideration academically as well, and I think if we did it, we probably would have said we did it for academic reasons, but in our minds it would have been both for academic, athletic, and maturity reasons.
So Chris, when you see the one particular parent in our piece who redshirted in kindergarten primarily for athletic reasons, and probably at that age, I would imagine, even though against the trend, but still this phenomenon is increasing. There's the cost of education, all of this playing into it. What do you make of it?
Well, I agree with you, Bob. It really is in full swing now. It's concerning. I think that families who race to make this decision to hold their kid back solely for athletic reasons, it becomes a very short-sighted and emotional decision. I think when you enter in the realities of how few young people actually do go on for full-ride scholarships or even beyond that, it's quite a low number. It's under 5% of high school athletes that go on to college at any level, which includes your walk-ons and partial scholarships. So, it's an interesting time. In my office, I've seen a spike in this over recent years. I would even say that it's becoming what we call a cohort effect. The stigma of being held back really doesn't exist as it did a generation or two ago. And I often wonder where this information is coming from at times too, because some of the families are being influenced by others with questionable credentials. There are certainly some coaches out there that have their own selfish reasons for persuading a youngster to stay back. So there's a host of concerns here, and I think if you don't have physical, academic, cognitive, emotional issues going on, but to solely hold someone back for athletic reasons, it's probably not going to work out for the vast majority.
When you say you see it in your practice, Chris, are you seeing issues that have arisen because of it?
Well, I see more families looking at this as a viable option, again, with the idea in mind that by holding their kid back, the odds will increase dramatically. And I think it was put well in the segment that led to our panel that that really doesn't exist. You know, the numbers are pretty straightforward. It's a remote chance, not to be pessimistic, but that's reality, no matter what you do. And then I get concerned, what happens for those people who put all their eggs in one basket and they're not getting other experiences in life, internships, jobs, life skills, career opportunities? It really does weigh in, and it can cause long-term issues if it's not focused on and they don't attend to those issues.
All right, Steve, so you coach.
Yes.
If at 8th grade you're making that decision as a parent, and you're working perhaps in concert with them as a private coach or an all-star team coach, and 13, 14 years of age, and you heard the one parent of the piece who had redshirted in kindergarten looking at a 2nd grader talking about body physique, and so we can all draw our conclusions about that. But if you're 13, 14, you have a little bit better idea what a youngster is going to develop in. But do you really know what kind of an athlete they're going to be a collegiate athlete?
Yeah, I think it depends on how they're developed. When you're talking about it from the athletic point of view, sometimes 13, 14-year-olds are a little bit more fully developed, depending on, there's a wide variety. But if sometimes they're a little bit more developed, you can kind of see where they're at. I know a lot of people look at it in the 8th grade that are undersized, thinking they're going to be more of what might be called late bloomers. It is obviously, risky in 8th grade, and if you're going to do it, maybe beneficial to be more earlier in life, like in the piece. But there are so many factors that come into this, and I think it's just a trio when it's about the academics, the social, and then the athletics. I think all three of those pieces have to work together in unison, or unfortunately it just doesn't make sense. But it's hyper-driven now by the athletics, and sometimes when we get the information, we hope all three pieces are being looked at, but sometimes, unfortunately, I'm sure it is driven by the athletic part. But, as you stated at the beginning, the question that you asked me, I think that sometimes you can tell at 13 or 14 if it makes the right sense, if you know what you're looking at.
Well, Mark, you played the game. You played Division I college basketball. You played for Bob Knight. You're 13, 14, a lot of tall 13 and 14-year-old kids. They're strong and they're big. The question of skill and how they develop is another issue.
I think when you look at, I've got 3 boys of my own, a 15-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old hasn't started kindergarten yet, and they play basketball.
And
what
age are you going to start them at? Let me ask you. Are you going to hold them back? Start them at 6?
I'm not going to start. I'm not holding them back for anything. They make their own at their own age. Traditionally there's been 1 or 3 reasons why you hold a kid back. Whether it was from a social standpoint, an academic standpoint, or maybe a learning disabled standpoint. And if you're not fitting in one of those categories in my household, you're staying with your class. I don't have a huge issue with parents that hold their kids back, because they're going to probably play against my kid. And if my kid can play against an older kid, which means my kid is going to improve because he's now playing against an older kid, then so be it. But what they're not understanding is that when their child gets to college, they're still going to be a freshman. Yeah, they may be a freshman in standing in terms of class, but have a sophomore age, but they're still going to play against seniors. So at some point, they're not going to be the older kid, the bigger kid. The fellow in the piece that said, well, he doesn't know if his son would have gone to Duke. Well, if he got a scholarship to Duke, I'm pretty sure he could have got a scholarship to some other schools, staying in his class. Like I said, there's a huge social aspect of it that we're not really addressing. Athletes are under so much pressure as it is. If we look at the news every day, there's another athlete that makes the wrong decision because of the pressure and the stress. And to add that on to a kid that you have to be successful because we've predetermined that you're going to be successful by holding you back, puts a lot more pressure on a kid. And a kid in kindergarten can't really make a decision of, yeah, I want to be held back a grade.
Now, Joyce, you're a journalist. At what point might this become a public policy issue, especially when you get to the idea of repeating 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, involving school budgets, the size of classes, things like this in public school?
Well, I think it already is starting to affect the level of play in high schools. We've had a couple of athletes here that are the top high school basketball players who've decided to go to prep school, retake their junior year, and take 2 years of prep school before going on to college. So yes, I think there might be some rules coming down the road.
Yeah, and Chris, then we've got countervailing research. And some of the pushback against the original Malcolm Gladwell idea, the outliers, this multiplies through years, that younger kids, smaller kids perhaps, they adapt, they learn, they have to use their brain, and then as they mature, they're a dual threat, as it were.
Well, yeah, in theory, I think when it comes to sports, we never know. The X factor is motivation, heart. Even with all the talents and abilities and skills, you know, we really never know what a youngster is going to think from age 10, 12 to 18 or 20 if they're even interested in competing anymore. But, you know, I think there's also another side to this that hasn't been expressed yet, and that is the competitive spirit and integrity. And what are we really modeling to kids when we say to them, hey, we'll hold you back 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? You know, why not just keep them back indefinitely to get bigger, stronger, faster than their competition? I don't know that that's really a good idea, and I know we don't have a lot of examples of multiple holding back, but why not? What's to stop that?
Mark, do you see a moral side to this?
You know, although I'm not big on it, I don't really see a moral side to this, because when you bring in the prep school element, when you look at it from a global picture and you look at what they're doing in football and in Europe with their academies, you know, they don't have the same system that we have. So therefore, their athletes, they're in the academy to become a professional athlete. Our farm system is a little bit different, where we have to go to college in order to become a professional athlete. So I think it's just a society thing for us as Americans to look at, are we going to go a prep school route and just have kids that just want to play basketball or volleyball or lacrosse as a professional, and farm them and groom them to do that?
Redshirting. Fascinating, and it's, we said, a growing trend. Steve Balance, Joyce Bassett, Mark Robinson, Chris Tankovich. Thank you all for being with us outside the lines.